Well, anyhow, my name is Gedali Gurfein. Shalom Aleichem from Jerusalem. And the rumor is that you guys are like super awesome. And I really, God bless you. There should only be another 100 million like you. What an incredible planet we would be living on. That you take time out from a TikTok generation. Actually, there's a new generation right behind you guys. It's called Tick. There's not even time for the talk. You just walk around like a little tick all the time. And it's really so amazing to meet people who still are plugged in to human life. It's really extraordinary. Maybe you guys are an endangered species. I don't really know, but it's truly extraordinary. And when people over there at Livnot Gurfein asked me if I would be interested in teaching, I think I got the word yes before the question mark had even dissipated from being asked. So it's really very, very nice to spend time with you guys. And I hope that this will be a good time. I know you're probably exhausted. By the way, I don't know if you know that how much Hebrew you speak, or just tell me, would it be easier if we did the class in Yiddish? I mean, is that easier? No. Yeah, right. Okay. Okay. So Livnot actually means to build and to be built. I've kind of been on and off a teacher there for umpteen years, and after a short while, I suddenly noticed an interesting thing about people who do Livnot programs. When they first show up, like woohoo, 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 kind of like one of those little Mickey Mouse cartoons, and everybody's got the buckets, and they're all going off to do the work together. And then like I come back like 2 months later, and it's like zombies like with lobotomy scars on their heads, you know. And the name of the organization goes from to build and be built and to become schlepped and be schlepped, you know. But it's really incredible that you guys stick it out, and and in fact, the whole name itself is really the inspiration for tonight's class, because tonight's class is, although I am a big fan of Despicable Me, tonight's class is really going to be more about making a better me. And if you think about the name Livnot Gurfein, it really says it all. In fact, this is a very deep idea from the Arizal as well in Kabbalah. And that is that there are Kabbalistic exercises which a person performs, and by doing something focused outside of their body, or with their body outside of their inner self, simultaneously they are actually entering into their inner self. Like there's really no way you can sort of put your hand down into your head and like scrub everything that's going on inside, but you can do it in a certain way by doing it outside. So therefore, actually what happens as you build, you can be built, which is the name Livnot Gurfein. It's not a standalone. It's not like you do something externally and that's it. You can't walk away from it, because in the end of the day, everything we are sum total of all of our experiences on the three levels of thought, speech, and action. So everything that we are doing in the world around us, as we're going to see a little bit later in this class, everything that's going on is also impacting us. And sometimes when you're in the deep of it, which you guys are clearly in the deep of it, it might be helpful to have a little time out and a little reflection, kind of put a little spiritual spice on the vast amount of physical activity that you've engaged in. I mean, you guys, what you're doing and where you're doing and when you are doing, you are literally a part of national Jewish history. I mean, it's always a wonderful thing to be able to help in situations, but in this particular, as we say in Hebrew, matzav, in this particular reality that you have opted into, this is historic, and it will be known as historic what you do. So it's really an incredible thing that you can pick up a hammer, pick up a paintbrush, and be part of eternity in your participation of what you do, and more importantly, is what you experience. So I wanted to play a little bit to get the class rolling. I want to play a little bit with the word me, because I'm kind of into letters, and I like shapes, and I really enjoy free form. So it's kind of a cute thing. I'm just making this as a little bit of a joke, but it's leading to something much more important. And that is, if you look at the word me, even in English, right? M-E, if you flip the M, it becomes a W. So it becomes we. And in a certain level, it really teaches us something very much about ourselves. And that is that no person is an island. No person is completely self-contained, self-sufficient, and lives totally in hermetic and as a hermit in their own world. But rather, there are two primary components, and the ratio and the relationship between them is highly individual. But there are two primary factors. One is the me, and the other is how am I part of the we? Who am I as an individual, and how am I as part and parcel of a larger organism called community or society? In all societies and civilizations throughout history, and Judaism is no exception, this has always been one of the most important pivotal points in legal systems. Societies have collapsed and succeeded based on finding a healthy equilibrium between the rights of an individual and the needs of a society. Because like in geometry, we have concentric circles. These two circles not only overlay in you because you're part and parcel of both of these spectrums, but they overlay in the society or the community or even the world that you live in, right? So therefore, you always have this challenge of my right to privacy, if you will, or a national need of security for information, as one of many, many, many examples. But the point of it is that a person has to be aware that they're both, because otherwise you can have people who become, God forbid, in a kind of dual negative way. They can become so introverted that it can express itself in a very obnoxious, selfish kind of a person, or it can express itself in a paralyzed person, where a person such of this nature doesn't need enemies because the enemies couldn't do as good a job to ruin this person's life as, God forbid, the person's doing for themselves. And on the other hand, there's also danger factor of going too much into the we component, because there are many times you'll find social workers and people in certain help fields who put so much of their life and intention in helping other people that they actually neglect the help that they need, or it becomes a distraction from thinking about the help that they need. And so therefore, if a person doesn't know how to help themselves, I mean, you learn this as soon as you do your first flight on an international airplane. First thing you learn is when the oxygen comes down, you have to put the oxygen on yourself first before you put the oxygen on your child or others. Well, why? I love my child. I'll do anything for my child. The answer is you can do more for your child or for your community if you're taking care of yourself as well. So therefore, self-sacrifice or a martyr syndrome is like an extreme going too far the other way. And so therefore, like the Rambam says, everything we do, we try to find an equilibrium. How do we find a harmonious balance between being who I am and participating with the world around me? That's really the interesting challenge. Now, from a Jewish perspective, the answer to that question is that it's actually kind of, well, we're going to get to this a little bit later, but I'll just to jump to that point for a second. It's based on concentric circles. It's never this versus that. In Judaism, opposites are not the left versus the right. And I'm going to get also into that a little bit later. In Judaism, opposites are the center versus the circumference. Because the left and the right, you can't have any, there's no item in this world that doesn't have two sides. And without having those two sides, there's no whole. Because the whole is created by joining together opposites. So the left versus the right is some sort of a friction, which is a friction, which is a fiction. But on the other hand, when you understand the unity of the left and the right, you create a whole. So the left and the right are never really the opposites. It's the opposite is, what is it? What is it really? What's the truth? I always love that way when you're talking to somebody, having a conversation, and all of a sudden they say, well, truthfully speaking, It's like, what were we doing until now? But anyhow, the truth of the matter is that this is what it is. That's the center point, and the circumference is everything it isn't. That becomes a big challenge. How do you know then which is the center point and is really real? And how do you know what all the spin doctors make really look attractive, but in the end of the day, it's a dead end that all it did was eat up a person's life and now they're too old and that's game over, God forbid. So that challenge of finding the harmony in how do I participate and find a balance and being in myself has to be first done by focusing on myself. Now, the danger of that, of course, is that if you talk about everything is about me, then that becomes the me generation. And then if it's about me, then I'm at war with you because you want it, I want it, and now we're fighting over it. And that fighting can escalate and who knows where it can go. But that's not what we mean in Judaism by this idea of first understanding me. And I'll explain why. So in science, there's an idea that there's no such thing as two snowflakes which are the same, right? I'm sure everybody has heard this, learned this, and accepted it without question. But just for the heck of it, let's question it. Just could you imagine the resources that would have to go into validating this? Like you have, for example, a whole team up in the Andes Mountains and a whole team in the Swiss mountains and this up in the Ural Mountains and then in the Rockies. And they're there with the little petri dishes and each little thing. It's all been networked so that looking for matching snowflakes. I mean, right? Nobody ever did the homework on that. But yeah, for sure I know there's no such thing as two snakes. How do you know? Maybe there's one little snowflake up there in China that's the perfect match of the one down there in the Andes. But whatever it is, the idea is an interesting concept. The concept being, of course, that because the way that they crystallize, the patterns are never repeated. But forget about it. Who cares about snowflakes? But if it's said about snowflakes, what if it's said about human beings? There is no such thing as any human being who is like another human being, which theoretically would make it absolutely impossible to get along with anybody else. Because we're like different species, if you will. We're completely unique little worlds. And how do we communicate and come out of our little world to talk to other people? But yet we do. And the irony of it is that even though there's no such thing as two human beings the same, all human beings contain the key factor. This is, of course, a very deep Jewish idea, but I'll share it with you anyhow. The key factor is that we are all made in the image of God. Now, as Jews, we have a big problem with that because we don't believe God has an image. So how can you be created in the image of a God which has no image? So what does the Jew mean when he or she says that we're created in the image of God? So the idea is that the image that God had to make human, the template of the perfect human being, is embedded in our basic OS, our operating system. There is an intuitive capability of every human being to sense in themselves some image that transcends whatever the society is cool that week. There's something way, way beyond that. There's something so holy and so powerful and so rich in terms of what is embedded in you. You are willing to die for it. How do I know? Because everyone dies. Nobody gets out of here alive. The price of admission is death. Yet we live. Why do we live? Because we know that there is something so valuable in life that is more important than being bothered by death. I mean, I don't want to get into esoteric things in this class, but in a certain level, if who you really are is the soul that sits inside of you, then this is a wonderful pony vehicle whose job it is to take you, transport you from the womb to the tomb. But that's all it is. And when you come out of this, that real you lives forever. And it's all a result of the activities in this finite world that we do and we perform. So therefore, there's two lessons in terms of step one of how we become a better person. Step one is to understand that even though I am absolutely unique and I have within me the same thing that everyone else has, because they're also unique, but we share this deep understanding that there's something very precious about this opportunity to be here alive on that planet. That is sort of the step one. Obviously, that has to be done in harmony with the same time you discover how great, and you are great, and you're even greater than great that you are. You got to look at the person next to you and realize that that person is also great, because as Jews, we only believe that there's one God. So there's not a Chinese God, and there's not an African God, and there's not a Hispanic God, and they're trying to fight for market share. It's one God who makes every human being, who loves every human being. Way more than every human being loves every other human being, sadly enough. But someday in our future, we will catch up to that state. But if we understand that every human being is precious to God, then we have a level that we can begin to communicate with other people rather than I'm better than your society, my nation's more important than your nation. We can actually find an even playing field where in the eyes of God, we are all equally important. And that becomes, in the long run, not in stage one, but the long run, what Tikkun Olam is all about. If you really want to have a world where the world pieces together all of these different parts, it has to begin with a platform of understanding that there's a huge human common denominator. There's a story, I don't know if it's true or not, but I tell it anyhow because it's cool. I like it. And the story is like a fifth grade teacher, and the kids are bouncing off the walls, and she's got to get like 5-10 minutes R&R just to catch her breath. And so she realizes that while most of her kids are pretty smart, that's not really true when it comes to geography. So what she did is she handed out to every kid in the class a map of the world. And she said to the kids, okay, I want everyone to take this map of the world, and I want you to cut it up, mix up the pieces, and then put it back together again. She realized by the time the kid figures out that Denmark does not border with Afghanistan, that that's going to probably be good for like 10, 15, 20 minutes. And so she does it. Within a minute, one kid, not particularly smart, he comes up and he hands the teacher the map of the world, perfectly put together. And she's flabbergasted. She says, how did you do this? He said, well, you know what? Before I cut it up, I turned the paper over and I drew a picture of myself. And so all I had to do to bring the world together was to get my act together. By putting myself together, I was somehow vicariously, on some level, some way, actually pulling the world together. Because otherwise, what happens is we can have a kind of pie in the sky dream, which is really a beautiful dream, but it has no legs. In Israel, most of my background since, well, 1993, until I retired a couple of years ago, or as my friend said, I was tired and now I'm retired. But before I retired, I've been working in high tech for many years in the Israeli high tech scene. And one of the phrases, I'll just say in English, that you learn, and there are a lot of these, believe me, Israelis in high tech are like into cranking out one-liners. But one of these phrases is, what's the difference between a visionary and a dreamer? And I was very much in startup world, which is, you get new ideas and you got to realize, is this guy a dreamer, or is he or she a visionary? And the answer is, they both have the exact same unbelievable, great idea. But the difference is that the visionary knows how to pay the electric bill. So the visionary has that image or that vision, but he or she knows how to get from here to here to here to here to there. Whereas the dreamer's lost. The dreamer's got the dream, but there's just no path that's going to get you there, or at least no path that that person knows about. So therefore, we can have the dream and should have the dream of how we can pull the world together. But if we understand that the process begins with each one of us pulling ourselves together, sometimes people get so involved in tikkun olam and save the world, they have no life. They have no relationships. They have no children. They're not even dealing with the basics. They kind of use this to bypass the basics. So therefore, when a person is able to focus on their own self-growth and development, this is a very solid and a very real sort of beginning. And then from there comes the concentric circles that I spoke about. The first circle must be the inner circle, which is you. We have a Mishnah known as the Ethics of the Fathers that teaches it in a very Jewish, clever way. I'll just say the Mishnah in English. The Mishnah says as follows: if I am not for me, then who is for me? But then it adds, but if I am only for me, then what am I? So again, it's kind of, there was once a great rabbi in New York. His name was Rabbi Soloveitchik, and he was a big word player among many other extraordinary things. And one of the things he always said, he says, don't call it the Garden of Paradise. Call it the Garden of Paradox. That the amazing ability of the human mind is to hold paradox in our minds. In fact, in Kabbalah, this is taught in a very interesting way. The word for heaven in Hebrew is Shemayim. Shemayim is made of two opposites, fire, Esh, and Mayim, water. And the irony of heaven is the paradox of the unity of completely two opposites. In Earth, we don't have that yet. That's our goal. Our goal is global resolution. But global resolution will be the ability to take absolutely two things that cannot be together and to unify them. That is the template of what heaven is all about. So therefore, when it comes to the square one of my inner circle, I have to be aware that if I'm not going to take care of myself, I cannot expect other people to take care of me. But on the other hand, if all I'm involved in is taking care of myself, then what am I? I mean, really, what am I? I mean, I always like to ask people, who was the richest man in Cincinnati in 1927 without using Google? Right? Nobody knows. But if you thought today, somebody said to you in your city, who are one of the richest people in your country or your city, right away you might say Elon Musk or say this, or if it was 20 years ago, you would have said Bill Gates, right? If it was 50 years ago, you might have said Dale Carnegie, right? But these names fade away. Fade away. They don't last, for sure not 500 years. But you know what? You say to somebody, hey, I'm coming over to your house for Passover, and we're going to talk about Moses. Everybody knows that name. Thousands and thousands of years later. Because it's not rooted in all about me. It's rooted by being me. I can be a player and serve the whole world, which is what Moshe was all about. There's a very famous story from the Baal Shem Tov that kind of highlights this idea. The Baal Shem Tov said, when I was 18 years old, I set out to change the world. I got fire, I got power, I'm going to fix the world. And by the time I was like 25 and so on, maybe 30, maybe I'm not going to fix the world. You know what? I'm going to fall back and I'm going to fix my country. And by the time they were 40, it was like, I'm not doing too well on fixing my country. Maybe I'll fix my state or my community. And by the time they were 50, you know what? I think I'm going to just try to fix my family. And by the time they were 60, well, maybe I'll just fix me. And nothing got done. Ironically, that whole process works the other way with the concentric circles. When you have youth and you have power and you have energy, as ironic as it sounds, the most difficult thing to build in the world is you. It's so easy to tell other people what to do. It's so easy to criticize. In fact, my Rebbe always said, when you point a finger at somebody, you're actually pointing 3 fingers back at yourself. So that's why he advised, if you ever point the finger, so just kind of go like that. That way you're getting all 5 fingers at them. But the idea, though, is if you're pointing the finger at somebody else, It's really easy to point the finger at somebody else. But the truth is, you got to look in the mirror, and that's the person to point the finger at. Look in the mirror and see if you love the person you see. And if you don't, you gotta learn to love yourself. Because if you get that power of love, a positive, healthy love, and you use your energy and you build yourself, that will immediately be reflected if you choose to build a family. And then if you do choose to build a family and you build it with that same attitude, we're the team, then all of a sudden you become the example on your block, you become the example in your community. And then your community, by all working together based on this momentum, it becomes the example for the state. The state becomes the example for the nation. And if you're lucky, the nation might even impact in your lifetime the entire world. It's doable. But the order is what's really important. It's the importance of being able to see. Now, that comes into the second step. That second step is, how do you see? Well, I can't unfortunately remember the name of the philosopher, but there was a philosopher who once said that man, meaning human, is a very big irony because he or she only has two eyes in their head and they look forward. And yet nobody can even see 5 seconds from now what's going to happen in your life. The only thing you can see is hindsight. We go forward, but we look backwards because only in reality, through hindsight, can we see what actually, not what we said we want to have happen, but what actually did happen. And therefore, hindsight gives us tremendous amount of foresight. As one American president, Harry S. Truman, once said, the only thing you don't know about the future is what you forgot to learn from the past. So therefore, if you want to be able to see where you're going, it requires hindsight. And this is an exercise that our sages teach us how to develop the ultimate 2020 vision hindsight. It's a trick. And the trick requires the art of visualization. You have to visualize yourself as 120 years old. I'm sure you know that joke. What do you wish somebody on their 120th birthday? Yep, have a good day. Because that's like the normal lifespan that we refer to in Judaism. Ad me vesri, may live till 120. But whatever. You're 119 and 363 days. And you're about to wake up, and a little voice says, nope. And the head goes back into the pillow, and suddenly the credits start to roll. Written, produced, and directed by God, in little cameo appearance by me or whatever. And you realize, oh, no more little chippy birds, no more beautiful sunsets, no more waterfalls, no more 5 hours straight binging on Netflix. All that's going to just go away. It's game over. In fact, the Zohar says that at that moment, interestingly enough, the person's entire life flashes before their eyes. Now, even though it's happening in billions of seconds, perceptually, it's really not. And at that moment, when a person's entire life is flying by, a person actually judges their own life. We're not really judged by heaven. We judge ourselves. And we come to a culmination of a sound that comes from deep inside of ourselves, where one or two sounds come out of our soul, not necessarily reaching out of our mouth, but one or two sounds come out, and it's either or ah. That's what it all comes down to, the or the which is the sum total of everything you did in your life. Are you happy with it? And if you are, it's yeah. And if not, whatever. But it should be yeah. That moment of yeah. I took my life in my hands. I freed myself from my past. I wasn't a prisoner of my own emotional hangups. I wasn't a prisoner of what other people did to me. And being freed from coming out of Egypt under the leadership of an egomaniac called Paro, I teamed up instead with my pure soul, Moshe, and Moshe led me to the Holy Land of Israel, spiritually and hopefully physically. And so therefore, when I review in my entire life, if I can visualize it today, if I can take myself now and go to 120 years and use my power of hindsight, I can ask myself today, what will I want to see? What will I want to review? Because your lives are all the time hitting T-forks or crosses or breaks in the road, and everything are decisions. And while the decision to maybe get off at exit 33 off the LIE might seem trite, in 25 minutes, you're going to be so far away in Kings Point from anybody who's halfway on their way to Montauk. But so therefore, what seems like a trivial little turn is going to have a huge impact on your life. So now you're making all these decisions as you go through your life, and some of them, God forbid, could take you down dead ends. How do you resolve that, right? Here you go. You have a decision facing you. Should I choose this or should I choose that? How do I resolve it? Real easy. You just go like this. That's it. You take the choice and you resolve it. But how do you resolve it? Because you have a game plan. You have a goal in mind. You have what I want to do with my life. And so therefore, when I'm evaluating, these could both be very valid choices. But now when I validate it, I do it according to my goal. And I say, yeah, I love this idea and I love that idea. I'm not stuck, however. I know that if I do this, this is closer to me. It's closer to what I want to get out of my life. So therefore, the process of making decisions and all of these things of going forward can be done when you have a hindsight view of what you want to be able to do with your life. This is something, I'm going to take it a step deeper. I think it's a really very important, very beautiful idea about this conflict resolution. And the step forward goes like this. You have a holiday, I'm sure everybody knows, called Hanukkah, or as Adam Sandler would say, Chanukah, or call it whatever you want. But at the end of the day, all of us know that when you light the candles, you light one candle and you work your way up to 8 candles on the last night. But many people do not necessarily know that that's only one opinion in the Talmud Mishnah. It happens to be the opinion that we follow, which is from the opinion of Hillel. But Hillel's best friend was Shammai. And Shammai's opinion was just the opposite, which very few people know. Shammai actually says you light 8 candles on the first day, and you work your way down, so the last day, you only have 1 candle. All right, that's fine. Guess what? Here's where it gets crazy. The Talmud in Shabbat, where it discusses this issue, says something that staggers the mind. It says, Zeh v'zeh divrei Elokim chayim. This opinion and this opinion are both the words of the living God. What? What? How could it possibly be? How could it be that this and this is both the will of God? Right? It reminds me of a joke. There's a rabbi, that's also a joke, but there's another joke. There's a rabbi and he's doing marriage counseling. And he's talking with a couple and he's listening to the wife and she's like, rah, 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 chewing off his left ear. And when she's done, he says, whoa, you're right. And then the husband, rah, 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 chewing off the other ear. Whoa, he says to the husband, you're right. And then the rabbi's wife walks in and she says to her husband, what kind of rabbi are you? How can they both be right? He says, yeah, you're right. Right? So there is that idea of how can they both be right? So I'll show you something phenomenal. It really is phenomenal, but it's going to require the screen, so I'm going to have to animate it. Okay, so here is Shammai. It's going this way. 8 to 1, 8 to 1. Down here is Hillel. 1 to 8, 1 to 8. Whoops, 1 to 8, okay? So this one's going that way, and this one's going that way. Problem here is we don't see the whole picture. What we see is the top moving across this way, and we see the bottom moving across that way, but we don't see the sides that fill the picture. Now watch this. This is amazing. If something's here, now I'm going to fill in the sides. Watch what happens. If something's here and I move across, come down the side, I move across, I go up the side. Look, what a minute ago appeared to be two lines going in completely opposite directions, when you realize them in the perspective of the whole, you actually realize they're all going in the exact same direction. And when you realize that they're going in the exact same direction, then you can understand how both of them can be the words of the living God. Why? Well, as they like to say in Harvard, depends on the context. So therefore, you have the context of Shammai is talking about a heavenly experience, and Hillel is talking about an earthly experience. And when you combine them into one, they all become the same experience. So therefore, there are many times as well in conflict resolution where two things can actually be at loggerheads and seemingly talking about completely 180-degree differences. But if you drill deep enough, you can resolve them and understand actually they're talking about the same thing, but from totally different perspectives. And the two perspectives that they bring are the very vital elements that will allow you to understand the object which is being done. So that's the next level. So the first level is to appreciate how unique you are. The second level is to make it concentric circles. You've got to put yourself in the center. The third level after that is to develop hindsight. So you have a goal in your life. Where do you want to go and how do you get there? And this is another element that brings us to the difference between growth and change. Growth in Judaism is imperative and it's vital and it's good. Change is dangerous. For example, when you plant a seed, which is about that big, of a tree into the ground, that tree, over time, if it has the right environment, can become an unbelievable redwood. I don't know if you've ever seen the redwoods, but if you have, the first and only adjective you can say is unbelievable, as if that's the only unbelievable thing that God created. But that alone, we can make a little song, Dainu. Had he only made redwoods, Dainu. Okay, so in that little seed is this imango tree. And so as the tree grows, all of the things which were there come out naturally and beautifully. Now imagine, God forbid, a mommy gives birth to a baby. And here you have this little, beautiful little baby, except one arm is a fully grown, developed adult arm. Wah, wah, wah. Right? That's like crazy, crazy. Why is it crazy? Because it changed. It didn't grow. The baby has to grow in that same equilibrium as the tree. It has to be kind and deal with all of its downsides and painful sides or whatever, but there's a process that unfolds. So as a tree grows, that's natural. If a tree catches on fire, that's change. So therefore, the natural order that we try to really to focus on is one of growth. However, as one of my early rabbis, John Lennon of the Beatles, once said, he said, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. So therefore, we all have our little plans and so on, but life has its own plan. And so therefore, while you're in the middle of your own life, suddenly circumstances maybe way beyond our abilities to control will force us to change, not to grow, but to change. How do we deal with that? Okay, here's the next secret of becoming a better me. I just don't know. My problem is I found this is one of the reasons I kind of retired from technology, because I realized that at the speed in which things were moving and developing, and look, I even wrote a patent in the year 2003 in artificial intelligence, and I don't have a clue today what's really, I still have my friends out there deep inside, Gemini and these other things, but I don't even want to know. But the point is, when things happen so fast and they change so quickly, I make references in technology today because I still, I do some tutoring in the high-tech world, and I realize that if I'm not careful, they have no idea what I'm talking about. I get so frustrated, by the way, I hope you guys are old enough to remember there were these balsa wood airplanes. Remember them? They came in a little plastic bag, and you could you had a little propeller and a little rubber band, and you put the wings in and had little wheels. I posted that the other day, and I said, when I was growing up, this was a drone. Okay, so does anybody know what a gyroscope is? Does anybody know what a gyroscope is? All right. So a gyroscope is, in the movie industry, it's an amazing round device when you're what's called track shooting. When you set up a track and you have a little cart on it, you have your camera there. So when you're shooting a shot, you want to be able to do a moving pan. So the problem is that obviously if it's moving like this and bumping, then it's going to look like it's something shot from a track, which you don't want. You want to be perfectly smooth. So they have this thing which has a bubble in it, which is called a gyroscope. And by putting the camera on top of it, the gyroscope absorbs all of the movements coming from underneath, and the camera remains 100% steady. So it's kind of like the camera's moving steady, and this is the thing that's adjusting to the change. This is the most beautiful analogy of a tool that you should have, we should all have in our lives. When change comes, not growth, when change comes, if we can absorb that change on our lower being, in other words, it doesn't rock our spiritual who we really are. It impacts us for sure, but we have a gyroscope that allows us to maintain an even keel on our mission critical parts of our life and being. At the same time, it has an amazing flexibility to be able to work with the circumstances as they unfold. This is taught in the Talmud by one of the greatest rabbis of the Talmud, whose name was Rava. And Rava said that a human being should be like a reed in the water. And he explained on a very simple level why. Because a reed is very firmly planted in the ground, in the water where it is. But simultaneously, the reed can move without breaking in both the wind and in the current. As the water pushes it or the wind pushes it, these are very metaphysical, Kabbalistic ideas as well, but that's not important. As it's hit, it remains rooted. So therefore, we have to know who we are. We have to know who we are as a person, who we are as a nation, and how we fit into this world. And that should be rock solid and there. But we also have to have that ability, because we cannot control circumstances all the time. And when change comes along and hits us, we have that ability to be able to be flexible. By the way, people add to the reason he used that, because in those days, the reeds were the quill. And so therefore, it meant that not only are you flexible and stable at the same time, think of your thighs. What is a thigh? A thigh is the stability of your body to stand. It's stability, and simultaneously, it's the power of mobility, fire, water, things that seem to be paradox, mobility and stability working together. So this idea of the reed is stability and mobility. But why the quill? So this is a very beautiful idea that I was once taught, and I'll share it with you. Every day you wake up, you are waking up to a brand new canvas. Nothing is on this canvas. It's kind of like if you get up at 5 a.m. on a snowfall before anything has ruined that pure snowfall. You wake up, your eyes open up, bing, I'm back, and the canvas is in front of you, and whatever you think, whatever you say, and whatever you do are your inks that will paint on this canvas dated February, what do we say? February 25th, 2024. And that will be your eternity. As that day moves on and the next canvas shows up, whatever you put on that canvas is your eternal life. And because that moment, nothing is ever lost inside the infinite. So therefore, everything we do and we get better and we become better, our painting and our crafting and what we do with our 24 hours becomes more and more sacred. This is why one of my rabbis once said, why do human beings not have duck hands? Because you had a duck hand, you would believe that you could catch in the web time. But with fingers, time is always, you can't hold time. In fact, there's not even a pause button. But what you can do is you can shape time. And that's what your life is. That's what all of our lives are really all about. It's that level of shaping time.